Welcome to the award-winning Justice Hour with attorney Lisa Macy. For the next hour, Lisa will focus on the law, government, and politics, and how they affect your life, your family, and the community. Now here's your host, Lisa Macy.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's another beautiful evening here in Palm Beach. Thank you again for tuning into the Justice Hour. I'm your host, attorney Lisa Macy. America the Beautiful is the theme of tonight's show as we face an election for president and for a new senator here in Florida. I bring you tonight's special guest, one of the more visible candidates for a United States Senate and former United States Senator George LeMeiux. This week in Justice history, on May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc was burned alive, tied to a stake in France at the age of 19. Tried by an ecclesiastical court, she was found guilty of heresy. It was written that she wore strange rings, dressed in men's clothes, and claimed to hear voices and saw visions. There's also evidence that at the time, women who were too powerful, as well as socially troublesome, would become targets and accused of witchcraft. Joan of Arc is one famous example of a woman who achieved a great deal of power as a warrior, but was then burned as a witch for her trouble. Joan of Arc, the patron saint of France, was a peasant girl who experienced mystical visions during the 100 Years' War, which convinced her that she was destined by God to lead the French to victory over the English invaders. The Catholic Church named her a saint. Was she simply a successful warrior, tried and convicted because of her power? Was she a saint receiving messages from God? Or was she ill, suffering from bovine tuberculosis? History is replete with injustices and atrocities committed under the color of law, religion, and the courts. Imagine being burned alive at the stake at age 19. I want to give you my website again. It's www.lisamacci.com. And you could also find me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter. Let me see what other news I read about today in the paper. We had a Supreme Court decision coming out, and it's a little bit confusing about CPS workers. The issue was in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal initially, and the Ninth Circuit held that police cannot interview children in schools without a warrant. Apparently, that decision stands, although it's not clear how that Ninth Circuit opinion will apply here in Florida. Apparently, the United States Supreme Court ruling applied only to the child protection worker and did not exactly overturn the Ninth Circuit opinion holding that police cannot interview children in schools without a warrant. I'm trying to find you the name of that United States Supreme Court. Camerata versus Green. It is disgusting the way that happens. I've had several calls in the past as an attorney for parents. They've never notified by the school. And if there is a telephone call from what we have, Department of Children and Families, who does the abuse allegations. They come in as anonymous allegations. Sometimes they come in from the school. The child appears in school with a bruise. Typically, if the child is beaten, as we had the case in Miami, which was an absolutely horrible case where that child was going in to school with broken bones, many, many bruises. She wasn't fed. It was clear when she arrived in school that the child was bordering on starvation. And apparently the DCF workers never did anything about it then, never went to school. But what I hear a lot from parents in Palm Beach County in Boca Raton, the school may call or anonymous person calls, and a lot of times the revenge may be that it may be an issue with a disgruntled neighbor, someone that they had an argument with, a child's parent that they had an argument with. And they call DCF, they make the 800 toll-free line, and they make a complaint saying that they have abused their children. DCF then shows up at the child's school. My understanding of the law as it is in Florida is that DCF, the school, does not have to contact the parent. The school officials frequently leave the children in a room alone with the DCF officials, and the child is then questioned. Your rights as a parent for DCF is, if they are coming to question you, leave a brochure at the end of their meeting with the parents saying what their rights are. I guess they're supposed to give it to them at the commencement of any interview or questioning. Remember, they are government workers. You're not required to speak to any agents of the Department of Children and Family. You have the right to speak to an attorney, as well as letting them in the house. Many times, DCF will go to someone's house to investigate a child abuse claim. A lot of these claims that are made are bogus. They're made for purposes of revenge, for purposes of harassment against the parents. DCF go to the house, and it seems they like to go to Boca a lot. Apparently, they stay away from neighborhoods like Riviera Beach and West Palm Beach, and they prefer to go to homes in Palm Beach or Boca Raton. They will typically arrive with a sheriff's officer and claim that the individuals, when they knock on the door, have to let them in. So you have to let us in. Many times they'll claim that they are exigent circumstances when they are not. They received a call on the 800 line, which does not typically classify itself as exigent circumstances. When they arrive, they claim that the parents have to let them in. What I advise individuals in those circumstances is to ask the police officer, sheriff's officer, maybe there, ask the Department of Children and Families if they have a warrant. Certainly, you should not be speaking to government officials without an attorney present, or at least knowing what your rights are. And this goes to all parents who are out there. And in terms of the school, do you think that's right? Do you think it's right for government officials to show up at your children's school without your knowledge, without your consent, and interrogate your child? This is happening quite frequently here in Florida in the schools, and a lot of parents are complaining by it. I know one child, the parent told me that they were going to be removed from their home, from their parents, by government officials after they were interrogated by the Department of Children and Families. Our call-in numbers again, 561-844-6167, toll-free 1-800-889-0267. I'm excited to now have Senator George LeMeiux in the studio with us. Welcome to the Justice Hour.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Was talking earlier, I gave a lot of your background out, and I discussed today's report about the Quinnipiac poll that came out. And is that something that you're excited about?
Well, it's always good to be ahead. I think polls are pretty premature. This race is a long way off. It's a year and a half. And honestly, all of the folks that are myself included have a lot of people to meet here in Florida. But it's always better to be ahead in the polls than behind them.
You have 15 months now?
That's right. The election, the primary election, is August of 2012, and then the general election will be November.
We're going to take a call from Barb, who is calling from Lake Worth. Good evening, Barb. How are you?
Hi, fine, thanks. I wanted to ask Senator LeMeiux, and that sounds good to me, about the League of Cities. He's supposed to be speaking there tomorrow, according to the Palm Beach Post. Is that true?
That is. I will be speaking there. I think it's at lunchtime tomorrow.
And do you know where that's being held?
I don't have it at the tip of my fingers, but before we finish today, we'll make sure that we let you know.
Okay. The main thing I wanted to bring to your attention is what they call the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, Local Governments for Sustainability, and it's run. It's Agenda 21, doing an end run around our states, Senator, and if Florida isn't careful, the state legislators are going to become irrelevant.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I've talked to a lot of groups here in Florida. Some of the Tea Party groups are really onto this issue. And we need to make sure that government is run by the people that we elect and that they're making decisions which based on the best interest of each of these communities, not tied into some international agenda. Something to be watchful for.
Exactly. And I just wanted to mention, Lisa, that Freedom Advocates is going to be sending a fella, Michael Shaw, a real expert on the Agenda 21, over to Lakeland, Florida on June 11th. And they can look it up on freedomadvocates.org. And if the senator or any of his aides would attend that, Michael Shaw is going to do a beautiful presentation on how Agenda 21 is being implemented in Florida. And it's a real threat to our property rights. And I hope, Senator, that you will defend our property rights in the Senate, because I feel you're the best candidate.
Well, thank you. I sure will. It's something that our founding fathers knew was very important, was the right to own property. And when property is taxed too much or regulated too much, it impairs upon that right. So I believe that I'm a less government guy, and I believe, especially in terms of property rights, that we need to get the local government, state government, especially the federal government's hands off of our property.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Lisa.
Thanks so much for calling, Barb.
God bless you.
Have a great night. Speaking of property rights, I know a lot of people were disappointed that the Florida legislature didn't take more action regarding the severe problem we're having with our real estate here. And the foreclosures, the immense number of foreclosures. Years have gone by. No one's done anything about it. Now we have this thing called the Rocket Docket in Palm Beach County. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but what it was an expedited process, because they said they were going to get rid of the glut in the real estate market. And the glut, getting rid of the glut meant removing people from their homes. Of course, they haven't paid for whatever reason, or sometimes it wasn't always that they haven't paid. They said some of the people that were being subject to foreclosures were dead. Some of the people had paid. Some of them, they weren't sure who owned the note. I guess they had several issues about that. There were lost notes. But what's your opinion on that? In the federal government, should they be doing anything about this foreclosure problem that is really severe in Florida, but it's going on throughout the rest of the country?
Well, Lisa, it's a big problem. And I was looking at some statistics about this just yesterday. And if you look in Florida here, we're really the slowest place in the country. Maybe one place, I think maybe New York, is slower in how long it takes for a property that's in foreclosure to be foreclosed upon. I mean, it's really about a 3-year process, because the banks are allowing folks to stay in their properties for a year or two, and then it takes at least a year for the foreclosure process to work. And look, there's got to be a balance between compassion here and getting the job done. But what we are doing is prolonging the pain of this real estate market by not moving through this in an efficient way.
Let me ask you about that. Because the banks wait 3 years before they file an action, is it right to deprive someone of due process with these so-called rocket dockets, which I hear that they're getting rid of? And I think they cut the funding off, which is a good thing as far as I'm concerned, because anything where you're depriving someone of due process to their day in court is not right.
Well, I'm all for due process. I just want to have an efficient system. We're in a situation in Florida where, according to a newspaper report I read yesterday, 25% of all the property in foreclosure in this country is in Florida. And when you have in your community, if there's a house down the street that's in foreclosure and stays in foreclosure and is not being tended to, and the grass is growing and the house is in disrepair, that is hurting everybody else's property rights too. So it is a balance, because you want to be protectful of people and make sure that they're not going to be deprived of their home without due process, but it also needs to be a system that's efficient and effective.